You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
My guest on The Luxury Item is Amy Smilovic, founder and creative director of the popular New York-based fashion label Tibi. Amy launched Tibi in 1997 while living abroad in Hong Kong. Over the years, she's honed her distinctive brand identity. She birthed an entire philosophy of dressing and being, which she calls creative pragmatism. During lockdown, Amy Smilovic took to social media, specifically Instagram, to reconnect with her community with off-the-cuff practical styling advice mixed in with a bit of life wisdom. Well, that sage wisdom not only attracted a massive new audience and devoted followers, but it also brought about a major resurgence for the Tibi brand. A New York Fashion Week favorite, Tibi has been spotted on celebrities like Kourtney Kardashian, Hailey Bieber, and others. Amy Smilovic creates pieces for Tibi that can be best described as modern, clean, sophisticated, and effortlessly cool, designed to ensure they work as well on the runway as they do in the real world. She has enormous influence over the fashion world for her plain-speaking styling advice, and last year she published the Creative Pragmatist book dedicated to her philosophy. And she also has a Substack newsletter of the same name. Welcome to The Luxury Item, Amy.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's exciting times. Your brand is about to hit 30 years. You founded Tibi in
Crazy.
it's amazing. So you founded Tibi in 1997 in Hong Kong. You were with American Express at the time, and also the ad giant Ogilvy Advertising prior to that. You
Yep.
certainly had the business acumen and marketing skills to start a clothing line, and some of the biggest names in fashion never went to fashion school to learn the tricks of the trade. How did your path shift to founding a fashion label?
I always loved, I loved psychology, I loved art, I loved business. And when I worked for American Express, I found out that I really liked sales and I liked the getting under the financial part of business. I didn't like finance per se, but when it made sense in terms of, product and selling and profit, I really understood that and really enjoyed that. And I moved to Hong Kong in 1997 with my husband, who was with American Express at the time. And it was really my chance to start my own business, something that I had always wanted to do, but I really wasn't sure what type of business I wanted to start. And moving to Hong Kong, I really was able to just do a checklist of, what do I love? What am I good at? What could I do from an intuitive perspective? Because I would be doing it alone and starting a clothing label in Hong Kong and being able to start from an intuitive place made, starting a clothing line the logical choice for me. What started out though, really like a checklist to get there on how to start, really became a business so of passion and love. I can't imagine having started any other business now in hindsight.
Was there a gap that you saw in the women's wear market in Hong Kong that you felt wasn't being addressed?
Yeah, there's something about getting out of your environment that allows you to see things a little bit clearer. And right away in Hong Kong, it was apparent that you had two choices in your clothing. You had either really high-end designer, it was either Gucci or brands like G2000, which was Hong Kong's version of the Gap. And there was a wide swath of middle market that was completely missing. They didn't even have, brands like a Banana Republic or an Ann Taylor level there. And so that gap was more apparent than ever. But as a person who loved fashion and loved designer, I wanted that gap filled, but I didn't want it filled with Banana Republic like product. And so, filling it with what I wanted at the price that I would be willing to pay, but at the quality that I needed seemed like the obvious solution to me. And then I think, soon I realized that this was the same gap existed in the United States. I just wouldn't have been able to articulate it had I been there in the middle of it all.
Were there some advantages of actually launching a fashion label in Hong Kong?
I think that, yeah, I mean, there were tremendous advantages because remember, this is 1997. And so America still had a quota system in place that you had to buy this quota in order to get clothing into the United States if you had made it in China. But other than that barrier of that quota system, China was a thriving production center. And they took production very seriously. They took clothing production very seriously. So I was in a place where the infrastructure to make clothing was all there, and it was there in a very sophisticated way. And it was so sophisticated, but I didn't realize, not coming from the industry, I didn't realize how incredibly different it was than had I started in the USA. So if I started in the US, the business was very fragmented. You had someone who would, receive fabrics, someone who would lay out your fabrics and cut it, someone would sew it, someone would trim. You had 9 different buildings that you could be working with just to produce one item of clothing. And I think that's why you saw those pictures back in the day of someone, rolling racks of
Right.
clothing up and down 7th Avenue. So imagine what that line looked like of someone, 4 blocks of offices that you had to take an item of clothing from and how it would go, across the horizon. Well, in Hong Kong and in China, everything was vertical. Those blocks of offices in the US, those existed in one building. You had one floor for receiving, one floor for cutting, one floor for sewing, one floor for finishing. And of course, that just made complete sense to me. And I didn't know that in the US they were doing it in a different way. And it allowed me to be a one man show, where in the US, you would really have to have a lot of different people to manage all those different relationships just to get one item of one, category of clothing produced. So it was an easy place to do business in that respect. What was hard was China was not there yet in terms of the quality. And I was very lucky in that I found 2 Chinese men who really they saw an opportunity where they were like, if this infrastructure exists and these people are trained to sew, why can't they just be better at what they're doing? With the right amount of training, could they do, young designer level clothing? And ultimately, as you've seen, they're doing luxury clothing as well. But they had the vision to be better and create product that could match up to, anything that was being produced in New York and certainly in New York at the time, and then ultimately in Italy. And so that combination of factors happening together made it the perfect place to start a business.
So when you first launched, did you even have a brand story at that point, or you just wanted to get your first collection out there?
I started with 2 different brand stories. I started with the one that I wrote on the plane on the way to Hong Kong.
Hmm.
And then I had the one that I created a week after living in Hong Kong. And things happen at warp speed there. And when I landed in Hong Kong, I was going to start a line of really clean, chic, modern pieces that would be tailored. It would be like I wrote in a notebook, it was going to be like Helmut Lang meets Donna Karan meets Calvin Klein, or, young professionals to be able to wear at accessible price points. That was the original plan. And it was going to be made in China, but it was going to be made with all European fabrics. And then when I landed, I found right away this place in what was called Sham Shui Po, had some Italian distributors there. I picked up fabric and I took it over to this factory, Benny and Ivan, that I had found. And within 2 days, I had a few pieces made up already that was along that line with that business plan in mind.
And I'm assuming you were aiming westward to launch your brand in the US. When did that journey begin, and which major retailers saw the potential?
What was interesting, I keep going back to my diaries because I I was thinking far in advance, but I wasn't thinking that far in
Hmm.
advance. I really wasn't thinking about where I was gonna sell this in the US. I wasn't It was more that I just wanted to see, like, could I make a product? Could I find an audience? And it was like each step of the way, I wanted to evaluate it and see what would come next. And I started selling my designs first, and these were when I said that I started out with this vision of this kind of Donna Karan, Helmut Lang, Calvin mode, it quickly, within the first week of being there, it pivoted to focusing on things that were, much more trendier and of the moment. And that's how my first collection ended up being inspired. Well, I went to Indonesia and used all of these batik fabrics that I had a printing mill on the island of Java create for me. And they did them in really bright, garish colors. And I made them into four simple styles: a skirt, a pair of pants, and two dresses. And that coincided with a big trend that was happening with Gucci. Tom Ford had come out with this kind of Lily Pulitzer on acid trend, and Michael Kors had come out with this weird riff on Lily. And I wasn't necessarily trying to riff on Lily or anything. It was just something that seemed really cool to me and seemed like I would want to wear in Hong Kong and seemed like something that I could actually execute. And so when I created that line, I started looking for customers that I could sell to. And I almost felt like I felt a lot of empathy for guys who would go to bars and try and pick up women, because I would literally go out and try and pick up women so that they could then become customers.
Ah,
And I would go, I mean, I had a partner at the time, and we would go to all the different haunts where we thought we could meet other women, and, in the course of like 10 minutes, pivot the conversation to the fact that
right.
we had started this clothing line, etc. And we ended up having a launch party at my house in Hong Kong, and we had like 60 new friends that we had picked up, and they came, and we sold around 10 or $12,000 worth of clothing at that event. And the items were between 180 and $300. So it was a lot of items, and it gave us confidence that we had something on our hands that was resonating with people. But what really gave confidence was that those expats, those women who came to the launch party, they went home for the summer and they went to places like Boston, they went to Palm Beach, they went to LA, and they got asked by store owners, "What were you wearing?" And when they told them Tibi, it's a new brand out of Hong Kong, these stores tracked us down. And that's when I was like, oh, this has much further reach than just being something that I could do with the expats here and figure this out. I can take this further sooner than what I had ever imagined.
When did the fashion magazine start picking it up?
The first Well, first of all, let me just say this. Fashion magazines have never really picked up Tibby. And, I've always been an outsider from the beginning. I definitely didn't pay the dues that I think people should have thought should have been paid. I mean, Jesus, I was in like every single department store, and I had been in business for over 10 years before the CFDA would even consider
Hmm.
my application. So it was there was some serious gatekeeping going on here if you came at this through an atypical route. So the first the first pickup, honestly, it was South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. It
Hmm.
was a little clip in Women's Wear Daily announcing the line, and that was in around 19 I think it was around 1998, because that coincided with my first coterie show. And then the big exposure turned out to be in the summer of 2000 when Bill Cunningham did a full page, I think it was in September of 2000, of these printed scarf skirts that everyone in New York was wearing. And he didn't realize that every single skirt on that page was mine. It wasn't a printed scarf
Wow.
skirt trend. It was all my skirts. And that was amazing waking up to that like gigantic full page color assortment of all my skirts. Um, but I mean, even still to this day, we've never had the Vogue article or anything like that. So, um, I had a New York Times article in 2020, but it's been, we've really done this through in a, a very quiet way, whether I've been muzzled or just quiet on our own.
Fred Siegel picked up your pieces early on, right?
Yeah, that was, when you look back at a company and you think of big turning points, that was certainly one of them. I had gone, I came out with all these bright printed cotton clothing, right? And then I'm meeting with Neiman's and Saks, and they were like, "What do you do for your winter collection?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I don't do winter. I just do spring and summer." And they're like, "No, that's not how it works. You don't get space on a floor for 6 months and then go away, and then, like, we've held your space for you to come back." And they're like, "Go show me what you can do for fall, winter, and we can talk." So, I went back to Hong Kong and I created a little, capsule of pieces using I'd taken traditional sari fabrics and recreated them on really rich, thick Dupioni silks, and I had taken some prints and uh, made them up in really beautiful four-ply bias silk fabrications and cut them into bias skirts. And I did that with 2 prints, and I was at the Coterie show showing the fall collection, and Jenny Braden from Fred Siegel Flair came by, and she went right up to the skirts, and she said, "You're on to something here. If you can push this out further, I'll be really, really interested. I'm really interested in where you're going with these prints." And so I left the coterie, and I remember I went to a little vintage store on McDougal Street, and they had a $5 bin outside, and it had all these really kind of garish scarf prints uh, for cities. They had one for for Tokyo, one for Paris, one for Rome. And I bought a bunch of them, and I went back to Hong Kong and I recreated those prints on really rich four-ply silk and made them up in the bias skirts, and then I did a little lace trim at the bottom. Now, what was happening simultaneously with that was, Matthew Williamson had just shown his first collection, and it was like Kate Moss wearing all these bright colored bias cut slip skirts. There was a brand Voyage out of the UK that was known for taking lingerie and dyeing it, tie dyeing it. So there was this whole kind of lingerie moment, a little tacky, that kind of turned early 2000s vibe. So when I brought the skirts to the Coterie show, and I had really hit on something, propelled by what Janine Braden had suggested, and those really, really took off. And that was, again, what turned into the Bill Cunningham full page spread there. But that was really when you got that big rush of sales. I think we left that Coterie show with 350,000 in sales just from that
Mm,
show, not
wow.
even, counting the orders that you went and, captured later on.
Many fashion brands keep their aesthetic more or less since their founding, but not you. And Tibi, in around 2012, after chugging along successfully as a brand, Tibi took a hard pivot, a major creative overhaul, if you will. You said you were tired of living a lie, that you didn't want to base your business on trends, but on your own point of view. What was that tipping point moment when you realized you needed to do a brand reset?
Um, we had if you remember that original vision, right, was that Calvin Klein, Donna
Right.
Karan, helmet lang look, and that was my style. And when I had these subsequent hits on the Lily Pulitzer, they used to call me Hong Kong Lily at one point. Then I was the printed skirts. And all of a sudden, I became the bright colored printed, go-to resource for brands. And I remember whenever I would have a show or anything, I would have to go change out of my real clothing and put on like my Tibi costume, my bright colored, fun, bold costume. And it just wasn't me at all. And what was happening was it wasn't my head of design either, Tracy. She came from Donna Karen. This was not her vibe either. And so you find as a designer, you don't treat something with the amount of respect that you should if you don't fully love it and embrace it. And so we were always trying to make it like, okay, we'll give this customer her print, but let's try and make it a little cooler to appeal to us. Well, ultimately, it didn't really appeal to us. And in a way, then, of course, it was never really fully embracing the customer who would want it. So it was kind of really not going there all the way. If you look at a brand like Zimmerman, right? Like she appears to love what her look is, right? It's a full embrace of it. She's not trying to like compromise it. But we were constantly compromising, and these prints were also falling out of fashion. And so all of a sudden you had things getting more minimalist in vibe. And I had stores coming in and saying, that our style really wasn't for them right now. They were going to be pressing pause on the business, and they would come back to us when prints and colors came back in style. And here I am thinking, God damn it, I've got all my black and navy clothes are back in my office. I changed
Hmm.
into this get up for you, and now you're telling me that it's not even your
Right.
thing anymore. And that was incredibly frustrating. And so I kind of felt like then that I had nothing to lose, that the business really long term was not going to support what it had become. And why would I even pursue it if that's not even what I was or my head of design Tracy was? And so that was the year of the pivot of really making sure that the physical clothing of the brand spoke to who we were as designers, as creators, and getting much more authentic in that, and being able to do honestly something that we loved, because ultimately for my business to work for me, it really needed to be something that I was proud of and that I loved doing. It was never going to throw off enough money that I could really have a real like, fuck it, I'll compromise my integrity because I'm making so much. I mean, that just wasn't the case then. So it really needed to be something that I came to work very excited to do. And I was not excited about creating what we were creating at the time.
Were you concerned that if Tibi's rebranding strategy wasn't implemented the right way, you risked current customers bailing on you completely?
I anticipated that a lot of current customers would completely bail on us. And I just knew that was reality. So yes, it was a concern, but it was one that I also accepted as fact. And so what we did is we took all of those prints and we took those girlier styles, and I put them under a different label that we called For Collective. And I set up a showroom in the garment district. And I let word get out that these were all the old Tibi styles that you would be able to trust the fit, you would be able to trust the quality. You were going to get all those great prints, and you could get them here under this other label. And that with Tibi proper, we were going to be creating the collection that was always the collection that we should have been doing from the beginning in our mind. And For Collective did its job. It garnered 5 million in sales in the first year. It stayed at 5 million in the second year. And then, like any new brand, it became a problem. You had stores coming in and saying, "Can you give us embellishment? Can you give us a new blah, blah, blah?" And that's when we were like, "No, we're not gonna do this. We're not creating Tibi 2.0 like in
Right.
its old entirety. We're gonna cut it loose, shut it down. We've earned 10 million from it now, and we're gonna use this to we use that to keep Tibi proper afloat until we could really get our sea legs." And what we found out was that while we did lose a lot of stores, I mean, there were a lot of stores with the name pink in them, like the pink
Hmm.
elephant, the pink umbrella, like, okay, those stores. They were not carrying the new Tibi, but our department stores that rejected it at first, they were able to eventually get their heads around it because what happened was I was all the designs that I did in the very beginning in the early 2000s, I was in the mood to wear those designs. I was wearing them while I also had a closet filled with black pencil skirts and, black sweatshirts. I was in the mood to wear the printed bias cut skirt. It was more that it was when I became not in the mood to wear it and when it became another beast, that's when I think we lost actually the customers that we had attracted in the beginning. And that's when we were attracting a different type of customer that I couldn't relate to. So when I reimagined Tibi in this more minimalist, cleaner route that reflected my own style, I heard from so many customers that said, "Oh, I bought you in the early 2000s and then I pressed pause for years and now you're back."
Hmm.
So I had evolved the way that any of those people had evolved themselves from the early 2000s. It's just that the clothing matrix in our industry doesn't allow for brands to evolve because it really separates the human aspect from it. You become these these adjectives that don't describe yourself. They become the adjectives of a brand that's supposed to stay consistent no matter what until it just dies of loss of an audience from Trent. It's funny how many customers I regained by establishing who we were. I regained super old customers, and then I attracted brand new customers.
Like many fashion brands during the pandemic, which you called Fashion's Summer from Hell in the New York Times, social media, in particular Instagram, became a popular platform for labels to keep their homebound consumers engaged, but also to funnel them towards making purchases from their e commerce stores. During lockdown, you turned to your community on social media to reconnect with them through Instagram stories and Instagram Live, offering these practical styling advice mixed with, a bit of wisdom. It turned out to be a huge hit for Tibi and gained you hundreds of thousands of followers. Social has been a huge focus of yours ever since. You've said that COVID-19 was a turning point for the brand on how you approach your business and what the Tibi brand stands for and how you engage with fans and customers. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think COVID really stripped bare all of you didn't have a plate of options to hypothesize about what could work or what couldn't work. Like you really had to use what you had right in front of you and then you had to make it work. And COVID revealed for us the true definition of what it means to be authentic. And you remember, like before COVID, I think brands had started up like Everlane, like
Hmm.
authentic was going to be telling people that you actually did, pay a factory $7 for the pair of pants that you were
Right.
charging
Radical
200 for.
transparency.
Right. Like everyone was making up definitions of authenticity. But for us, it turned out that authenticity meant that when you when you decided that you did have to talk to people because it was your only way to stay in business, that when you got on social media, you said, "Guys, I got to talk to you because it's the only way we can stay in business." And you said what you were feeling at the time and you were going with what, you didn't have to come up with the strategy to be empathetic because you were empathetic. You didn't come
Right.
up to, you didn't have to have a strategy to look like you kind of needed your customers badly because you did need them badly. And so just letting yourself talk and be real on Instagram turned out to be the authenticity that we had always been seeking, and that we just didn't know that that was what it was going to be, that it was really just us talking to people and listening to them and explaining ourselves and understanding that by getting the opportunity to speak to people, you realize how nuanced things are and that people aren't so interested in the extremes of fashion. Not everything has to be so black or white. Maybe things can be gray. And if you get a chance to explain what that means, as long as you explain yourself and people understand it, they can agree with it or they can not agree with it, but they at least understand who you are as a person, which meant that they were understanding who we were as a brand. And we had never had a mechanism to be able to tell people who we were as a brand. We never had enough ad dollars to do it. We didn't have enough PR exposure to do it. In hindsight, had we had both of those, it still wouldn't have done it because it wasn't us telling the people who we are. And owning that voice it is so empowering. And I always tell, small business owners, young designers, you're sitting on, your own voice is literally the definition of authenticity. It is what people in large companies sit around. It's why they hire Bain and Company, they hire McKinsey to help them figure out how to be authentic. Like you literally have something that these big companies would kill for. And we just didn't realize that that was our secret sauce. And once we were able to use it, uh, it changed everything for us. It literally where 2010, 11 was a change for Tibi, a pivot in terms of the visuals of the brand. 2020 was a pivot in terms of a complete disruption of our own brand and disrupting every single thing about how we did business.
So, as consumers crave greater connection and authenticity from brands and gravitate towards the people who personify and drive a brand, are your marketing efforts leaning even heavier into your secret sauce of organic content?
Yeah, I mean, yes, for sure. And what I found out was that the organic content that we were putting out on Instagram, it turned out that even with our own employees engaging in watching their company's Instagram, that everyone was understanding better about who we were as a company. And therefore, they were all speaking about it better. And it made all the different divisions within our company talk from the same, like we're singing from the same hymnal all of a sudden. We were doing things that in companies took a tremendous amount of like off-campus training and documentation in order to get people on the same page. We found ourselves very naturally on the same page. And so now, we've got store stylists who all have their Instagram page. Everyone is tackling things from different avenues and leaning in to spaces where they can be the most impactful. And, one store stylist might be better at TikTok than another one who might be writing Substacks and be better at long form communication. So we're talking to the consumer through social media with all the different individuals that we have in the company. And we definitely are not using any outside resources for our marketing. We're doing everything in house because when you do things in house, we get the responses right away. We hear what people like, we hear what they need more explanations on. Um, it just keeps you fully engaged. You have to be fully engaged nowadays to really understand what your next move should be.
Tibi's brand identity and creative philosophy is centered around the idea of creative pragmatism, a term that you coined. This philosophy is based on the idea that clothing should be both functional and expressive, and that people can find their own style by balancing creativity with practicality. Where was the idea of creative pragmatism born out of?
It was born out of frustration from
Hmm.
stores who were always asking me to define my style. And when I would start to use two or more words to define it, they were like, well, are you bohemian or are you a modernist? And I was like, well, can I be like modern but still chill? And they're like, talk to me when you know who you are. And the industry is so bifurcated, trifurcated, whatever, between these one word dimensional brand descriptions, and then within that one word, then a very specific price point range as well. And that was very frustrating because coming at this from a more human perspective, I don't know anyone that I could describe in one word. And so coming up with a word to describe the multitude of feelings and the complicated way that I look at getting dressed was a way for people to get their arms around the meaning of our brand. And so a creative pragmatist is someone who really does lean into creativity, but they're still functional. They've got utility, and pragmatism is really critical to them as well. Their head might be in the sky half the time, but they're still firmly grounded. And it turned out that a lot of people are like that, and it helped the person who was, you know, um, if you're like super creative and you love pink and purple, but like, what if you're a psychiatrist and and you're dealing with people's who've got real issues and you need to be taken seriously? Like, how do you square those two parts of your life, of your
Mhm.
personality? And so th- coming up with the term creative pragmatism has been really helpful for people who felt a really very uncomfortable friction in their lives constantly between feeling like they were very confused about who they were because they weren't able to express it the way that the pages of a magazine had told them that they should do it. And this kind of logical critical thinking approach to things really settled a lot of people and helped them find their own style. And um, and that's been very special about the brand and what we've created.
Yeah, and Tibi has an extremely devoted, dare I say, obsessed fan base who show their enduring love for the brand. I witnessed it firsthand when I was online at New York Fashion Week show in September. Your fans were out there in full force showing their Tibi love, all leaning into your minimal, chill, sophisticated looks. They were of all ages, too, and they
Mm,
really turned to
yes.
you as their style sage. And to me, it's less about being a cult brand and more about being a cultural brand, a community of fans whose power comes from like the shared passion. What resonant cultural themes are you tapping into that intertwines with your customers' lifestyles?
Well, it's interesting. I got a DM yesterday from a customer, and she wrote to me and she said, I've noticed that funny actors, funny comedians, funny people wear a lot of Tibi.
Hmm.
And she said, I am a comedy writer. I wear a lot of Tibi and I see this over and over again. Why do you think that's so? And I said, it's really funny that you say that because it is absolutely true. And I said, I have my own theories on it, but I said, personally, I'm very interested in your perspective on this. And she wrote me back a very long and thoughtful DM. And what she said is that people who are funny, people who write comedy, they have to dig very deep. They have to be very introspective about things. and they have to be very comfortable with friction and mashing up things that could be very sad on the surface and finding humor and lightness in it. And she said, because it's in that friction that people laugh,
Mm.
and that's where humor really comes from. And she said, I think your clothing does that. It has a lot of friction. There's nothing one note about it. It's neither sad nor beautiful. It's never just silly or it's not serious. It's got that complication built in, and people want to show that about themselves. Our customers want to show that depth about themselves. And so I think that the people who wear Tibi, and I'm at about 5% men now on my Instagram followers now. We're getting a lot of men as well. But it's important to them that they not look like they're part of a tribe. It's important to them that they look like they are independent thinkers. And I couldn't believe it when we did our first runway show, after we gave a break from runway after COVID for a while. But when we went back onto the runway, I said the only way I would go back into the runway is if the predominance of our customers in the audience were actually customers of ours, like the end consumer.
Right.
And it was funny, before the show, we said, do we want to have like a red carpet? Do we want to like photograph people as they come in? And at the time, I was like, I don't think I'm ready for that, because I've never seen all of our customers in real life in one place, and I don't know how they're going to show up. And I had visions in my head of, the year was like 2007, I think, and I went with Olivia Palermo to Japan. We had a Japanese license. We did a big event in Japan, and like 90 out of 100 women all showed up in like head to toe Tibi, and it was all in these like printed looks, and it was at the time my worst nightmare. Like it was just this one yellow dress on repeat like 80 times in the
Right.
audience. So I didn't know what to expect from this big runway show that we did in New York, where we had 800 guests, and they all came. And I remember, when you're backstage, you have the monitors up and you can see people coming in. And I remember I was like, shit, we need a camera guy out there. Like, people people were inspiring me. I kept telling the camera guy through the little microphone, I was like, go get that woman in the way that she's mixed our blazer with that comme de garçon skirt, and go get that other woman there and what she's done with like our pants with that Sakai top. And I was so inspired by our customers and how none of them showed up head to toe. They were just so defiantly not going to show up head to toe. And so, our customer really does not want to be put into a box. And I think our clothing really allows for that experimentation. It's engineered for that, because I don't want to wear my own brand head to toe. And they can sense that it's really about just giving them really tools to express themselves rather than, a costume.
I also discovered Tibby's universe of creations actually transcends garments to include a whole glossary of terms into the brand's ethos. Tibictionary. Did I pronounce that right? That is really
Yes,
a tongue twister.
yes, yes.
Tibby's Tibictionary are words and phrases you use in your popular Instagram lifestyle classes. You also turn creative pragmatism philosophy into a book, The Creative Pragmatist, which I think is in its second edition. Did it come out yet?
It comes out in like a week.
In a week. That's great. And it's
Yes.
a guide for people who want to achieve that lifestyle. And you also have a Substack newsletter, The Creative Pragmatist. How do you see sustaining the creative pragmatism philosophy long term so it doesn't go in and out of fashion?
Well, I think one of the key things first is, when you mention the Dictionary, these these words that we came up with, and now almost 3 years ago, um, they're really words that are like, they operate like first principles. They're very distilled so that they can be very clear but very broad at the same time. And they are they're they are words that absolutely convey something in their the word actually has a very direct link with its meaning.
Hmm.
So for me, I really had a hard time learning in school. I was really bad at memorization. And if it was only when I could really connect with the meaning of something that it would stick. And so for me, when I came up with words like big slim skin
Hmm.
or 1 ton or none, it wasn't just to come up with a vocabulary that we could own. It was a way to summarize a very complicated principle into something that would, once you got it, it made such intuitive sense then. And you don't have to, you're usually not like, it's not a word that's at the tip of your tongue because you so viscerally understand what it means. So, you know, it's been, I don't think I've added a word to the dictionary in 3 years. I'm not looking to create new acronyms for the sake of creating acronyms.
Right.
These turned out to be like the golden rule, the first principles. And even when I did volume 2 of the book, I resketched every illustration in the book. I ended up rewriting every single chapter of the book, but I only rewrote it in a way to explain better, to explain it better. I've got more experience under my belt now. I felt like I could explain these principles better, but each individual principle, not one of them changed. None of them, because they really are first principles. You know, it's like your 10 commandments, right? Like do unto others as they'd have done to you. I don't know why I keep quoting the Bible. You would think that I'm married to a Jewish man. I've raised my kids Jewish. I am not religious at all. And I don't know why these verses keep coming up, but they're very core and essential. Like no one says, oh my God, treating your neighbor the same as you want to be treated. That's so yesterday, right? Like it's a
Mm.
very core principle. And so when I came up with these clothing principles, they're very core. They will never go out of trend. These are not, it's not about low key lux. It's not about grandpa dressing. It is just principles that are just drilled down to where they can't be drilled down any further and they stick and they apply every single time. If you go back in history, you're like, damn, that was still that applied in the 20s. You know, it's historically factual and I think it's a permanent thing forever unless we're all living on Mars in spacesuits. And even then, I'll probably will make it chic.
And you've made it clear that you're committed to focusing your business on direct to consumer, select independent e commerce sites, and also certain specialty stores around the world. Tibi has two stores, one in Soho here in New York and in St. Simon's Islands in Georgia, right?
Hmm.
That's where you grew up. And you used
Yes.
to sell at department stores like Saks and Neiman Marcus, but you exited U.S. department stores. You said in an interview with Glossy that every day I'm grateful we're not working it with any U.S. department stores. Why is the department store model broken for a brand like Tibi?
Well, first of all, I think it's broken for tons of brands. It's just sometimes they don't run the numbers enough to realize it, or they realize it too late. But I think that it's the department store model is so fundamentally broken, in my opinion. And I don't really think it's of any fault of their own. I think that, you know, they were getting clobbered by the big e-commerce players when the big e-commerce players first came out. The e-commerce players were super funded. They were not obligated to turn a profit. They could give anything to the consumer to attract them. And as a competitor, I mean, how do you compete against someone who is not obligated to make money and can do anything to attract? a customer when you absolutely have to pay for your overhead. You are not sexy enough to be getting with the Wall Street attention, the investment attention. Like they were really done in by how deeply super funded and sexy the e-commerce world was to the investors. And so I just want to preface it by saying, like, I think that their behavior, how they had to be to designers, was something that I think if you spoke with any individual at a department store, it was not what they wanted to be doing. There was no way they wanted to be calling these brands and asking for 90-day payment terms. They were not wanting to ask for gigantic returns. They didn't want to put a small designer out of business by shipping back an entire order or rejecting one that came 2 weeks late, you know? So these are good people who were stuck in businesses with really bad models. And and so for us, we rationalized for years, like maybe it made sense to stay with the department stores because it was an advertising opportunity because so many people walk through their doors. Well, not that many people walk through their doors, right? So that benefit went away. And then it was like, well, they're helping us meet minimums and keep our prices down. And that really became not so true, and then they were breaking for sale so soon that it was really diminishing your profit margins, and most importantly, it was really undercutting the business of the smaller specialty stores that really did wanna work hard for you, that really did wanna be a partner for you. And so in this business, you really, once you start selling to those department stores, it's nearly impossible to find a clean time to exit because you're always committed to getting paid for the product that's on the floor and the
Hmm.
product that you've invested in the future on behalf of the department store. And so for us, we, before 2020, we couldn't find the place to unwind. When were we going to not be so in debt for the future with these guys and need what, payment for what they had on the floor? And when COVID happened and they wrote you letters and said, I'm sorry, we owe you millions of dollars, but we're not going to pay you, and we're sure you understand it's the time of COVID. That's when we were like, you know what, now is the time to exit. And while I was getting on Instagram and being very in front of my customers, it turns out that so was Stacy from Hampton was on Instagram, and so was Sherry McMullen out in San Francisco. And these stores, the guys from Space 519 in Chicago, they were all in front of their customers as well. And a woman named Yasmin with Schneeweiss in Austria, it- they were doing what they had to do. And we were all supporting each other then. I was calling Yasmin in Austria, and we were doing Instagram classes together. And we formed this group of people who, it was, it could not have been more apparent how much we needed each other to survive. And these people were in it with us. And, department stores and the big e-commerce players, like, I mean, they just couldn't do that. I mean, who from Saks was going to get on Instagram? Who from,
Right.
like that just wasn't going to happen. And so these people became our partners in the truest sense of the word. And so we really committed to them that when we got through this, that we were not going to start selling again to all these stores that had really screwed us over. And we were not going to let those, we were not going to do business with people who screwed them over with markdowns. And you've got stores like Essence in Canada. I mean, come on, like, every week there's a new reason for a sale from them. Every Substack that you read, when they promote a brand and they highlight something, it's always in parentheses saying, and you can get it for 50% off at Essence here.
Mm.
Like, you're fooling yourself if you think that being with a partner like that is a place for you to get brand awareness. And it is such, it's just such a a playbook thing from a fashion playbook that really is not relevant anymore. It's gone. That is not the way it is nowadays. And this industry is just so different than it was years ago if you want to be an independent brand. I think the big guys you see, these really guys who are being super funded right now, they found a way to do it in the old school way, but those brands are very few and far between. So if you want to have a business where you really love showing up with incredibly creative people and doing things that you are so proud of, and and working with great people and great stores, you've got to disrupt this business and do it in a different way. You cannot have your hands in both pots and expect to be able to really win. I mean, my opinion, obviously.
And most of your business, your brand to consumer businesses here in the US, something like 84%, and the rest is international, Canada, Australia, and the UK being the top countries. But it's interesting that some of your top countries on Tibi's Instagram are followers from Italy, India, Korea, and China. What other countries do you see as opportunities to grow your B2C business and embrace your style and philosophy?
To be honest, I see every single country as an opportunity. It's more of how far do we want to stretch our bandwidth and enable to enable ourselves to perform better from an e-commerce perspective in those countries. What I would prefer to do in these key countries where we have tremendous opportunity is I would prefer to be much deeper with partners there that we have great relationships with. So
Mhm.
there's like Walk Store in Milan, Schneeweiss in Vienna, Grace in Melbourne. Those are stores that are independent stores, but they are owned by people who are very savvy business thinkers. And I would really, I think there is, I don't want to open stores in countries where you've got people who do it so much better. I don't know why to try and set up distribution in those countries when maybe Schneeweiss in Austria could really do something for us in a much bigger way that could cover Europe. So we're really trying to think in ways that allow us to stay very small, but allow our partners to win really big.
You said that you don't design for a certain type of woman, that you and your team are the customers. You don't chase trends or read merchandising reports on what colors are in or out. And following your own lead has served you well. It's rare for a contemporary fashion label to make it to, past a quarter century, almost hitting on 30 years. Do you think following your instincts has been the biggest contributor to the longevity of your brand?
Yes, because I just don't know how else you would do it for longevity if you are committed to staying privately owned. Um, and because we're committed to staying privately owned, we've basically said that we are committed to not growing beyond a certain scale. I can't imagine us being able to keep our principles intact if we were a $300 million company. I think that would be hard. And maybe we'll be doing a podcast in 3 years where you'll be like, Amy, you're a $500 million company. How did you do it? And we will have found a way. But um, right now, I'm 100% sure that we are just in an infantile stage in terms of awareness. I am sure that in every country, there are other people who think similar to me, and that our biggest challenge is just letting those people in other countries know that we exist. So I don't feel like we need to spread the uh, the look of our product. I don't think we need to spread our classifications as much as it is just simply still getting the word out. I mean, Tibi is so under the radar. It is, And as part of it will be, it will always be under the radar because it's just not suitable for a lot of people. While it seems quite basic, it really is not. Everything has very much a point of view to it that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But there are still tons of other people who it will completely resonate with who just don't know about it yet.
So do you think the idea of creative pragmatism could actually become a movement?
I think it is a movement already with lots of women, and I think that and men, and I think the opportunity for a movement is this. I think the movement is that you don't have to be one thing or another. Sometimes being a combination of things from one pot and the other can actually be a thing. It doesn't mean that you don't believe in something. Just because I don't believe in something completely black, and just because I don't believe in something the way completely white believes, it doesn't mean that gray is not a thing. And I
Mhm.
think that it's been a trend for a long time that, if you don't believe this here, then you must believe that there. And I'm like, yeah, what if it's like a little bit of that and none of that? Like, I think the trend is for people to be able to codify the things that they believe in and then kind of stand behind that, irrespective of where it lies in terms of what other people think. And so for us, we codified it, and that's creative pragmatism. A lot of people write to me and they're like, you know what, I'm not very chill. I don't like things modern. I'm a little bit classic, but I'm edgy or whatever. What's another movement that I can be part of? And I'm like, okay, I don't know, but you should go create it. Like, that's a thing.
Right.
Just go create it. So I think the trend is that you don't have to follow things so starkly black or white. You can be something quite in the middle, and that can be something. It doesn't mean that you're watered down. It doesn't mean that you don't have a point of view.
So, Amy, my final question is the luxury item question, which I ask all my guests. So, if you were stranded on a deserted island and you could only have one single luxury item with you, what would that luxury item be? It can't be any form of air or water transportation to get you off that island or anything that requires mobile service so you can call somebody to get you off that island. It's just lonely you on this island filled with sand and palm trees and perhaps some hermit crabs here and there. What would that one single luxury item you would like to have with you?
I think I would have an incredible pair of sunglasses, super rich sunglasses. Well, I'm on a beach, like I've got to
Yeah.
have eye protection. And I could just see myself like shielding my eyes all the time. And I would just like a really pair of like my black Phoebe Philo chic sunglasses that I bought. That's what I would have.
Amy Smilovic, founder and creative director at Tibi, thank you so much for joining me on the luxury item.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.